There are some books that just completely change the conversation, and Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow is definitely one of them. It makes an argument so powerful, it really reshaped how we talk about race and justice in America. So in this explainer, we're going to break down its core thesis. So the whole book kicks off with this really provocative question, one that gets right to the heart of the matter. Can a society officially get rid of one system of racial control, like Jim Crow, only to quietly build a brand new one using totally different rules and language? And Alexander's answer? It's not a maybe, it's a straight up yes. She argues that the United States hasn't just theoretically done this, it has done it. And this new system, it's mass incarceration. Okay, so to really get what she's saying, we have to wrap our heads around this key term, racial caste. Now, this isn't just about individual prejudice. It's about a whole system where a specific racial group is legally locked into a lower position by law and by custom. Think about it. Slavery was a racial caste system. Jim Crow was a racial caste system. And what Alexander is arguing is that mass incarceration is simply the next version of that. So Alexander wants us to look at American history not as just a bunch of isolated events, but as a cycle, a reoccurring pattern. You see it right here. One system of racial control gets dismantled, and then another one, kind of redesigned for the times, just rises up to take its place.
All right, so if mass incarceration is the new system, what's the engine driving this whole thing? What makes it go? Well, according to the book, the primary fuel for this machine is the war on drugs.
And believe me, this engine didn't just start up quietly. It absolutely roared to life. Just look at this number. Between 1980 and today, the number of people locked up for a drug offense exploded by over 1,000%. I mean, that's not a gradual change. That's a sudden, seismic shift.
So who were we told this war was for? The story we heard was that it was all about going after the big fish, right? The violent kingpins. But when you look at the data Alexander presents, the reality is just completely different. The vast majority of people swept up in this weren't kingpins at all. They were arrested for nonviolent, minor offenses, with a huge number of them just for possessing marijuana. So you gotta ask, how did it blow up so fast? Well, follow the money. The system basically created these huge financial incentives. Police departments got federal grants based on how many drug arrests they made. On top of that, asset forfeiture laws meant they could literally keep the cash and property they seized. Suddenly, there's a direct profit motive baked right into the system. Okay, this next part is maybe the most crucial piece of the puzzle. We're going to talk about what Alexander says is the real punishment, the part that's even more permanent than prison itself. See, the system's real power isn't about the time you spend behind bars. It's about the lifelong label you get branded with, felon. And it works in these 3 stages. First, you have the roundup, where police have massive discretion on who to stop, who to search. Then comes the conviction. But forget what you see on TV. Almost nobody goes to trial. The vast majority of cases end in a plea bargain. And then finally, step 3, the label. You are officially branded a felon, and that mark can stay with you for life. And Alexander really boils it down with this quote. She says, "This system depends on the prison label, not prison time." Think about that for a second. The whole point isn't locking people up, it's about locking them out of society. The label is the real sentence. And this is what leads to this powerful idea she calls the invisible cage. You can be out of prison, walking around physically free, but you're still trapped. You're living in a permanent second-class status, all defined by these legal roadblocks. So what are the bars on this invisible cage? Well, there are all these forms of discrimination that, shockingly, are perfectly legal once you have that felon label. You can be denied the right to vote, kicked off a jury, barred from public housing. You can be made ineligible for food stamps. And of course, there's that little box you're forced to check on job applications, effectively locking you out of huge parts of the economy. Each one of these things, it's another wire in the cage. And all this brings up a really critical question, right? If this giant system of control actually exists, why don't more people see it? How does something so massive manage to hide in plain sight? Well, the book uses this brilliant metaphor of a bird cage to explain it. Imagine you're looking at a bird cage, but you're staring so closely that you can only see one single wire. You'd probably think, how can this one little wire trap a bird? And you'd be right, it can't. But when you step back and you see all the wires together, how they're all interconnected, then all of a sudden the structure of confinement, the cage itself, becomes perfectly clear. And this is how the system protects itself, with color-blind language. Every single rule, every single wire in that cage is defended as being neutral. Hey, we're just getting tough on crime. We just don't want felons living in public housing. Right? On the surface, it doesn't mention race. And that official neutrality makes the racially biased result of the whole system incredibly hard to fight, both in court and in public opinion.
And this right here, this is the crisis in perception. The justification we tell ourselves is that we're just punishing individuals for making bad choices. But the reality, the structural reality that Alexander points to, is that we've actually built a system that's designed to lock an entire group of people into a subordinate position. And as Alexander argues, what allows a system like this to continue isn't necessarily overt, active hatred. It's something more subtle, a kind of societal indifference. It's a colorblindness that lets us just look away from the devastating impact these supposedly neutral policies have on certain communities. So all of this leaves us with a really tough question to sit with. If you build a system where all the rules look neutral on paper, but the final result is a cage that traps one group of people far more than any other, what does justice really even mean?